Okay, peeps, welcome back. So today we're going to be comparing historical data against the Grayscale Trusts. So with that being said, let's get it. Okay, so the things we're going to go over here is there was a request in a previous video. I apologize, I actually forgot about this, but that was the ltcn to Litecoin comparison. So we're actually going to do that first. And then we'll go over a few of the Grayscale Trusts and compare that against both the yield curve and the Fed funds rate. Which in my opinion is extremely important because, again, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, I mean, the macroeconomics are actually influencing the economy right now and the markets. Trust me, I hate it as much as the next guy. I wish they would just get this crap over with so we can all go to the moon. But, we just got to be patient and persistent. Again, that's not financial advice. You guys can do what you want to, but the markets have been waiting for almost 2.5 years for the Fed to cut rates, and it is getting kind of old, but, they said they were going to come out and cut this month, so we'll see. I do think they're going to do it. I'm not going to say I think they're not going to do it. I think this time they are actually going to cut rates. It's just a matter of how much they're going to cut by and how the markets choose to react to it. I think it's actually going to be bullish. Okay, so we're taking a look at LTCN versus Litecoin. We did actually have Litecoin in the previous cycle. We didn't know anything about LTCNs, so we made some decent money on Litecoin. Nothing like extravagant or life changing. So the thing I want to point out here is that the two charts do look kind of similar, but they also look a little bit different. So Litecoin started really ramping up and going to the moon kind of right around that October timeframe. You can see this. I got to zoom in here a little bit so you guys can actually see this green candle right here. You see how this thing kind of bottomed out, like it was just sitting roughly about this channel here. Okay. Wasn't really doing much, just kind of bobbing around, not doing much of anything. I mean, believe it or not, I've spent enough time looking at Litecoin to where it's kind of obvious that's what's happening. You can basically see we're doing the exact same thing right now. So Litecoin's kind of bobbing between this $40 and all the way up here at 105. It's mostly just a channel, so sideways chop and or consolidation, accumulation, whatever you want to call it. Funnily enough, it's pretty much at almost those exact same prices it was at before it broke to new all-time highs, or I should say ripped to the moon back during the previous bull runs. So this is on the monthly chart, so it's much easier for us to understand when the breakout happens. So you guys can see the breakout of the trend line happened on this candle right here in November of 2020. So it broke the downtrend line. It also broke out of the channel and had a massive rip to the upside during that month. And then, of course, it shot up for many months after that. And you can see LTCN on the right also did the same thing. So once again, this was October, November timeframe of the previous halving year, which was also around the time of the elections. So it pretty much rounds itself all the way back to what I said before, which is that when we see these things start to pump, it's likely going to happen sometime around October to December of this year. Okay, again, we're in a halving year, 4 years later, roughly around the same time in the cycle as the previous time that this thing popped off. And I mean, if history is any indication, we should see something very similar, if not the same, happen. There's this old saying that goes, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So maybe it might be a little off on the timing, but then again, crypto is mathematical. I mean, Bitcoin is based on math. So it's exactly 4 years every cycle. Generally speaking, more or less, it's pretty much about 4 years in terms of the bull bear cycle. So that's the Litecoin LTCN comparison. And again, I'll show you guys the bull bear cycle here. Actually, I'm going to pull up Bitcoin on the Litecoin chart instead. I'll show you guys the bull bear cycle here on Bitcoin so you can see what I'm talking about in terms of the 4-year Bitcoin bull run cycles. And again, this really hasn't changed much throughout history, so I'm not expecting it to change this time either. So I really got to zoom out here for you to see this. So again, first year was red. I'm pretty sure Bitcoin came into existence before 2011, but this chart only goes back to 2011. So you had 2 years of green, then you had your bear market year. And again, the bear market year is a once every 4 years, right around the middle of a presidential campaign. And then you have your 3 bull market years, bear market year, 3 bull market years, bear market year, and currently we're in we're in the second of the third bull market year. So you can see it's very, very cyclical. Okay. I mean, I don't know how else I can tell you that this thing is basically precise math, is pretty much what it is. So we get 3 years of green, 1 year of red, 3 years of green, 1 year of red. Usually Bitcoin breaks to new all-time highs during the election year and also the halving year, which again is the second of the 3 green years. So that would have been 2016, 2020, and then it should be 2024 is what we're looking at here. Now, I think that personally, I mean, Litecoin does have some correlation with LTCN, but if I'm being completely honest, I think Bitcoin is actually a better instrument to use to compare it to LTCN because, again, it has a lot more history. And I mean, comparing Litecoin to LTCN, it's not a bad idea, but it's like comparing Litecoin to Litecoin. I mean, you're not really going to learn much by looking at the same chart. So again, I'll say, like I said before, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, Bitcoin Gold, and even Dogecoin to some extent are all oscillators to Bitcoin. Okay. So when Bitcoin goes up, those will go up. Most of the time, that's usually what happens. And then when Bitcoin goes down, those will go down. Now, there's an exception with that, and that is that Dogecoin, usually when Dogecoin has a big pump and Bitcoin hasn't really moved, that usually signals an early indication that Bitcoin's about to make a big move. I've seen this in the previous cycle multiple times, and every time that I saw it, it happened. So, I mean, you guys can do what you want to with that. Maybe it's coincidence. I don't know, but it seems pretty odd that a meme coin would basically front run Bitcoin's next move. So let's take a look at the little bit of history we have here on Bitcoin versus LTCN, and we'll do BCHG too, just briefly. So once again, Bitcoin starts smashing towards all-time highs, actually breaks all-time highs in November. So you can see as soon as Bitcoin starts ripping towards its all-time highs, what happens? LTCN starts ripping towards all-time highs at the exact same time. So I'm expecting Bitcoin and LTCN to move in sync with each other, which means that I think LTCN is probably going to go to all-time highs right around that, once again, October to December of this year. So now I'm going to go over BCHG, and then I will get over to the uninversion and inversion of the yield curve and the Fed funds rate. So BCHG, you can see that there was a slight pullback here in September. Again, we talked about the small pump and the bigger pump theory. It's not so obvious on the monthly, but we did talk about it in the previous video. So once again, I mean, August, September, July, August, September, usually somewhere in there, but especially September, usually very bearish for markets, especially crypto, but for stocks as well. So it's not really surprising that there was a pullback here. And also we saw some selling in September of 2021. And if I go over here to September of 2022, you can see that month was red. And then again in September of 2023, there was a pullback way down here. I don't know if you can see it, but this little candle right here before. Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I take that back. Actually, September was a green month, but we had a little front running of the bearishness here in July. In August, it's more about the seasonality, not so much about the month, but September is usually the one. And then, of course, we see some red here in September. So more often than not, September usually a pretty bearish month. But then on the other side of that, October, November, December, that's bullish seasonality, holiday season, elections, Bitcoin's time to go to all-time highs. That's usually when we see the big pump. So again, as soon as Bitcoin gets around that previous 75K level or above, or even before then, as soon as we see it start smashing to the moon, that's theoretically when these trusts should start moonshotting. How much exactly that happens, that remains to be seen. So let's go to the Fed funds rate real quick. Okay, you gotta give me a second, y'all. I'm trying to find it. So, okay, so you guys can see here that as the Fed funds rate was falling, we did actually have a pullback on the price of BCHG. Okay. So there's a possibility that when the Fed cuts rates this month, maybe somewhere along the line of cutting, we may see a pullback. But again, we may not. And I'll reiterate what I said before. It kind of all depends on how fast or slow the Fed cuts, the measures in which they cut, and the reasons why they cut. If the market anticipates that the Fed's cutting because they've lost control of the economy, they might freak out and dump. But again, it goes back to the good news, bad news theory. Okay. It really depends on why the Fed's cutting and how the markets perceive it. If they perceive it as a good thing and they say, oh, well, the Fed's got control, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And then they manage to not screw it up, then we could just see straight upside. Okay. And we may not necessarily see some kind of flash crash like we saw in March of 2020. It may just be, Bitcoin goes on its usual move. But I do want to point this out to you. So, unfortunately, LTCN and BCHG don't have a lot of data here to use, but you guys can see that, during the beginning of this Fed cutting back in 2019, there wasn't even a chart here to look at. So, but as they were cutting, as you guys can see, right as we got to around the time that Bitcoin was supposed to go up during the halving year, even though they were still cutting, LTCN did, even though they were cutting, it still went to all-time highs. Okay. But of course, they were also printing money back then as well. So there is that. So I'm actually going to go to a different chart here. I'm going to go to ETCG. Reason being, I know, again, it's not relating to Bitcoin, but there is a lot more data here. So you guys can see that right as the Fed topped out on the rates previously and they began cutting, what happened? We got a big pullback here. Of course, this was also the time when Bitcoin had its kind of mini bull run to 13,000 during that year in the first half. And then the second half, it dumped. And of course, we had the pandemic and whatnot. And after the Fed had cut a significant amount of its rates, then the ETCG trust went to the all-time highs. You guys can see it didn't top out all the way until May. Again, that lines up with the altcoin season because I don't think altcoin season is likely to happen until after 2020 or 2024. I mean, I don't think we're going to see an alt season until 2025. That's usually how it's been historically. So the other thing I want to go over here is the 2-10-year spread. Okay, so 2-10-year spread. If we go back to 2019, you guys can see is that the yield curve wasn't really inverted back here. It kind of inverted a little bit, like this little pump fake to the upside, trying to get above that 1% level, but it didn't really do it because the Fed, in my opinion, hadn't really raised rates all that much at that time. But as you guys can see here, they're way up there right now. The yield curve is uninverted, just so you all know now. So it has actually officially uninverted on the weekly, and I guess at this point, just the weekly time frame. So, but the point I want to make here is when the yield curve did drop off, it reduced in percentage. We did actually see a pullback in the ETCG trust. And once again, we can go over the Grayscale Trust with this, but I think the best indicator here, if I'm being completely honest, is Bitcoin because it's the most history. That's usually what moves the markets is Bitcoin. It's usually not Litecoin or Bitcoin Cash. So, but as soon as this yield curve bottomed out or got close to it, I should say, that's when we started seeing this thing really rip to the moon. Now, the yield curve, I'd have to do a yield curve and Fed funds rate cutting comparison because it's hard to say exactly what the timing of this is. I don't think that the uninversion of the yield curve is really all that relevant to crypto. Again, crypto is based on a 4-year cycle, so you can see even though that the spread here was at pretty much all-time lows, I mean, it didn't really matter. It was still going down right around November as Bitcoin was breaking all-time highs. If the markets were going to dump with the yield curve, it probably would have continued to dump all the way into April, but we didn't see that. Bitcoin was smashing all-time highs at the end of 2020. So let's go over to Bitcoin and compare this, okay? So the point I want to make here is that you guys can see, once again, we had that little tiny bull market in 2019. Then it kind of sold off in the back half of 2019 into early 2020 before eventually we ripped to the moon. Of course, we had the pandemic and all that. So But usually when the yield curve goes down, the 2 versus 10-year, usually that means the Fed's cutting rates, and when it goes up, that means the Fed is hiking rates. And then in terms of the dollar, how that compares to the yield curve, when the Fed cuts rates, the yield curve drops, which means that the dollar loses value because, again, nobody wants to put money in a savings account that's only producing 0.2% interest versus when the Fed has their rates at all-time highs, it's like 5 or 6% interest. So people move their money out of cash and they move it into risk on assets. So when this happens, money comes out of cash, goes into things like crypto and stocks and stuff like that. And as you can see on the chart on the right, that's usually when this thing moonshots. And when the yield curve goes up, that usually indicates that the Fed's tightening and people want to move their money over to safety into high yield savings. And that's usually when the price of Bitcoin goes down because, again, the dollar and Bitcoin have an inverse correlation. When the Fed raises rates, the dollar goes up and Bitcoin goes down. And when the Fed cuts rates, the dollar goes down and Bitcoin goes up. That's usually what we see. So, but once again, Bitcoin is kind of the gold standard here. That's how we compare it. I mean, look, I'll be honest, y'all. It all basically comes back to the end of the year of the halving year. That's pretty much what we're looking at. Okay. So regardless of whether the Fed cuts rates or not, I am expecting Bitcoin and altcoins to go to new all-time highs basically between October of this year to probably maybe October, November timeframe of next year. That's what I expect. I mean, that's been usually what happens. So, and again, we always have Bitcoin all-time highs around the end of the election year. And this is the election year. We have elections in 2 months. So anyways, hope you all enjoyed this content. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all later. Peace.